Today, Aubrey Plaza appeared on Amy Poehler's podcast, Good Hang, and it was her first major public appearance since the tragic passing of her husband. And it was honestly a really beautiful and insightful conversation between two women that obviously very deeply care for one another, and I highly recommend listening to it. The podcast in general, Good Hang, is really, really wonderful. But Aubrey talked about a movie that came out this year. And she was talking about it as a means of explaining her feelings around her grief. And I wanted to talk about it because it really highlighted this issue that I have a lot of problems with about the way that we talk about movies on the internet and in the modern era in general. So Aubrey asked Amy if she had seen the movie The Gorge. Now, I reviewed this movie. I hated it. I thought it was quite cynical and soulless. But Aubrey was talking about the depiction of the Gorge in this movie as, like, in her mind, the perfect representation of like a physical manifestation of her grief. The fact that this gorge that plays a major role in the film is representative of like this immense grief that she just lives with, regardless of how intentionally she wants to interact with it that day. It's just ever present and constantly there alongside her. It was a really insightful take, honestly, and a way of contextualizing her feelings to her loved ones that is really helpful, I think. And it reminded me of something that I frequently try to remind people of on the internet, and that is that there is no means of objectively determining a piece of art's value, either positive or negative, because people on the internet and in the modern world seem really desperate for like general consensus about quality around things. And I think that it ties into like young people's avoidance of like anything that could potentially be read as cringe. It seems like, to be cool is really important right now, and to be cool is essentially just to be generally like it's about conformity. It's about everyone agreeing that something is cool. And I think that is incredibly antithetical to the idea of art. In my personal opinion, art, the greatest measure of success you could possibly grade a piece of art by is whether or not it made you feel something. And I think obviously even a film that I think by any objective metric that you could use, and not to say that there aren't. I believe deeply that the study of film and the history of film and film criticism is important and meaningful in and of itself. But that's not the point. The point of criticism is not to come to some kind of agreement about whether or not a film is good or not. It's supposed to further the actual purpose of art, which is to feel something and to better be able to communicate and understand each other, in my opinion. So a silly little streaming film can actually end up being incredibly meaningful to someone who finds meaning in it. And that's why I really struggle with the way that, discourse unfolds on the internet. I've been off Twitter now for several months, and it's been honestly incredible, but still being on this app, every day there's someone who wants to stitch someone else and start some kind of like debate or debunk someone's opinion or review or whatever, which is just fucking insane in my opinion, because it's actually a great thing that people have different human reactions to art. I think it's really, really beautiful. I think it's this incredible, beautiful reminder of our individuality and the fact that you can never separate your lived experiences from your like objective interpretation. Your interpretation and your reception to everything is going to be based on everything you've lived so far and everything that's happened to you up until this point. And I think that's incredibly beautiful. But in an era when our most impactful form of criticism is an aggregate site that boils down a film's inherent value to a percentage, it's really hard to continue to remind people of that, to continue to try to remember that maybe a person whose opinion doesn't align with the masses, the general consensus, isn't trying to be a contrarian. Perhaps they just had a different experience with a piece of art. And I feel like if you think anything other than that, it's an incredibly egocentric worldview. If your worldview is that anyone who doesn't agree with me must be trying to be different, bro, that is a wildly individualistic and egocentric way to view the world that is not helpful or good. And I feel like this obsession with like reaching a public consensus is also really bad. I feel like, throughout history, public consensus has been proved wrong many, many times. Not about any one thing, about really important political things and about art. I mean, look at the movie Blade Runner, for example. It was an incredibly middling film for that year. It had an incredibly lackluster response, both in the both in the box office and with critics, and now it's one of the most impactful films of its era to this day. But it's not about being proven right or wrong, although I do love it when that happens. It's just, this video is really just to remind people that I think that the way that we talk about art is a product of this like really soulless era that we seem to be in, where the success of something is determined in this really capitalistic and conformist way, which shouldn't be the point of art, in my opinion, at all. But that's why I am just so exhausted by discourse in general, and like the performativeness of like so much of like what happens around film conversations on the internet. It feels very self-serving. It feels very algorithmically engineered, I'll say, and also just really needlessly personal and mean-spirited. And I think that that's actually the opposite of why I fell in love with movies and love talking about them with people. So I don't know. This is a great podcast. I highly recommend everyone listen to it. But this little moment just made me think even more deeply about these thoughts that I have around film discourse, let's say.